So we've got this sort of, I'm just doing one figure off of the painting from this. You've got the underpainting, which is this kind of softly roughed in white on dark background. Looks very ghostly for this Degas study. And we're going to very carefully start applying some colors on top of it. Now, one thing that I think we're going to look at and that I'm going to use a lot is a drier approach and kind of more of like a patting or a scrubbing. You can see here I had a lot of paint on that brush, so it looks like paint strokes. I mean, it's too thick, too perfect. So we're going to use this kind of like patting motion. You can see my brush sort of dabbing into it, and then also a little bit of like a scrubbing or a circular. It's very soft touches, and you're going to use a drier brush. I'm wiping my brush off a lot off screen, and I am using quite a bit of medium or water to keep it nice and thin so that we're getting that little bit of like texture of our canvas showing through, or in this case I'm using a cold press watercolor paper. So you can see here that little bit of, I've got water and a little bit of gel medium, just like the ability to pat over that underpainting. You're very quickly showing the value range without having to make as many colors. We're not having to mix as many tones. So you can kind of just pat these washes on top of it. And that sense of like patting or circular motions helps mimic the scale of brush stroke that we would see in the original painting, right? You can also blot them. I'm going to do it with my finger once in a while. You could use something else, like a rag or something like that as well. And it's using several layers of different colors to create like that appearance of, when we look at this Degas up close, we're seeing lots of different colors inside of it. We're seeing greens, we're seeing oranges, we're seeing blues and reds that when they're mixed together create these lovely layered, more neutral appearances. And then when we stand back, what we get is the overall impression of the texture of it and also of the value range. So we're keeping in mind of the value range and using our soft focus to see that, which is what I'm going through right now and carving back in my darkest shadows. But then we're zooming in and making sure that we're catching all those little bounced lights of different colors that are inside the brush strokes. And we're doing that with multiple passes, essentially, of different small amounts of color, done with translucency, so that they kind of show through each other and letting them happen organically. It may not be a perfect recreation, stroke for stroke of the Degas. It's capturing the feeling, the emotion, and the movement of it. So this has quite a bit of water in it. You can see that that's helping it travel very far. It's helping us get kind of that soft, brushy feeling of the oils. And it's helping us with the translucency to layer it as we get that shadow that passes underneath the bonnet. Blocking in some of the texture in the folds of the dress here. That's the medium that I'm pulling into, and a couple different browns up on top. And I'm using quite a bit of medium for this because I want to get that feeling of an overall shadow from the brim of the bonnet that comes down low over the eyes and tints all of the colors with a value shift that has a pretty hard line on it. Now I'm mixing in some of those more yellow and ochre colors that I see bounced on the shoulder of this study. There is a big highlight also on this shoulder, but I'm aware that adding that white highlight in later is easy. It's nice now to be able to let this pop on top of it, and because that white's already there, this yellow is going to seem brighter by comparison on the areas it goes over the white versus the areas it goes over the dark background from the underpainting. So it'll be easy later to add the highlight back in. It's easy to see the darkest shadows in this. It's hard to see some of the midtones, so I'm trying to also find those little softer shadows, especially I'm looking at on a computer screen for the same reason you have been, because it's definitely like tight contrast. But there are some soft shadows around the bridge of the nose, things like that help differentiate it and keep it a little less ghostly. But it's also the overall appeal of like a whole stack of these characters versus looking at just one of them. And that no piece of this painting feels flat. There is no singular area that there's not a couple of washed colors. So even in the background, I did two different, a brown two different browns, and then I washed it with some greens to get that kind of like mottled dark background. So here you can see I'm modeling some of the greens, a little bit of a grayish brown in, and keeping the movement short brush strokes. There aren't a lot of like long ones, but so that they move consistently along the folds to mimic that movement. But I'm seeing a lot of like short jerky motions versus in the face I'm seeing more like round, padded, layered, soft motions. That's a little drier. You can be a little wetter up around the bonnet and a little wetter in like more exposed brush stroke, I think, in the bodice of the dress. I'm muting down some of those shadows, adding a little bit of grayish over the nose shadow, things like that, so that I'm getting the right amount of control over them. That nose shadow is particularly bright, or dark, I should say. If you make it too light, then it doesn't read. You make it too dark, it looks like skeleton. Somewhere in between. Here I'm able to take some of those nice dark shadows and carve in the like center line on this that gives us that direction and helps lead the eye up to the face. I went and covered my window so that we don't get that cast light that's not helping us see the differences. So I'm mixing up a muted ochre tone, you can kind of see, to help us start to bring to life a little bit more of those like warmer, muddy yellows that I see in the skin tone now that we're zeroed in on like finding the exact hues. Everything's starting to dry, so we can take a very nice dry brush of tack. So I've got a larger brush now, and it's very dry, and I'm able to pat this in and make these kind of large brush strokes that fit with the motion of the piece. Finding areas that have all the same color while I have it on my brush and kind of bouncing around and hitting all of them, and then going and mixing another color. Put down that like burnt sienna color, seems a little bright, patting a little dark brown on top of it so that we get like a variation on it. It doesn't have to be blended in advance. You can let it blend on the page a little bit. That's going to read a little bit more impressionistic. But using all those sort of soft patting motions, that dry brush effect gets us all this like very soft edges, a little washed edge. We're not getting beautiful firm lines. We're getting lots of layered soft edges. We're not being very controlled about where things begin and end, which is where we get these like beautiful, impressionistic, blurred people. Ghost people. Like I said, some of this I'm using medium in, some of it I'm just using water in. As we move towards the end here, I'm definitely leaning harder into water as we're getting more into areas that we want to see exposed brush strokes and like movement. So I've moved into a flat brush, and this just has a little bit of water and quite a bit of paint. And then I'm using a flat brush that I've kind of like separated the bristles on so that I have good movement with it. And I can see some of the like individual bristles on it, and I did that by like peeling my finger along the edge of it before I painted with it. So instead of getting it nice and smooth and flat and against the edge of my palette, I've moved them apart so that it's got kind of like teeth, like a comb. And then this is my darkest color, kind of a nice deep dark brown, and quite a bit of water, and I'm using it just to block in some of our nice dark shapes. Bouncing between our highlights and our shadows right now. And this is sort of a muted green with some yellows and some browns in it, quite a bit of water, and I'm making sort of soft gestures and wisps so it's transparent and it's going to dry down much darker. You're going to be able to see through it. But let's just get some of those soft trailing soft edges around the bonnet and behind it, and those like indistinguishable brush strokes that are trailing kind of away from the neck. I'm not really sure what they're supposed to be showing, but So I hope that that helps. That's sort of the techniques I would use to tackle this, and good luck.